Welcome to Fossil Creek Tree Farm and Nursery. I got it backwards last time. I said nursery and tree farm, but you know, you can, however. The key thing is you're here. So today we're going to be talking about trees. And I'm going to do a guy thing first because what do guys dig? Tools. And if you're a guy nurseryman, you dig hand tools. Because, especially me, because power tools, you're likely to get injured. These, not so much. But I'm just doing a little trim job of some little deadhead things to pretty it up. I just got these a couple days ago.
Super sharp.
They're the things. Well, trees, man, aren't they magnificent? And this year we had quite the demonstration of trees because we had a drought, so they were a little slow coming out. And then we started to get some rain, and they thought about it a little harder, and then we got some more rain, and then all of a sudden, man, I went out. I'm living in my backyard these days, and the trees were bare, and I kind of appreciated them. Now, sometimes when people come in and they ask about shrubs or trees or whatever, and you may be familiar with this, but they'll say, you know, I want it evergreen. You know, they don't want anything that's ever off duty. You know, they want it working all the time. Well, we don't have that many evergreen trees, and one thing that I found from living with trees for a while is, golly, I appreciate when they lose their leaves. In the winter, it lets the light in, lets the heat in, and you get to get a good view of the structure or the engineering of the tree, which is so neat because we have a lot of trees that are their branching is one of the most ornamental things. It's louder. Even, I try not to be too, but I have to remember I'm not talking to myself like normal. I'm not, you know, driving down there. I'll talk like I talk to the other people on the freeway. Okay? That's usually pretty loud. What were you thinking? That's one of my comments. But anyway, like one of our examples, the if I can pull it out of the ether, the Traveler Redbud, you know, it's kind of a weeping thing and really gnarly growth, and I kind of like looking at it more without leaves than with leaves. Of course, the leaves are pretty and they're big, and I'm a junkie for big bold foliage, but the structure of all the branching and leafing is just too cool. Of course, that particular tree, although it's really more of an ornamental shrub, its peak is when it puts its blooms on before it puts its foliage on. So you not only have a really gnarly growth, but you have the gnarly growth with little blooms all over. That's just too cool. Of course, Crepe Myrtle is another one that the bark and structure are really appreciated in the winter because Crepe Myrtle is, you know, a lot of trees and shrubs, their trunk, you know, it's just like my arm. It's like, you know, there's not much there. There's not much to, you know, it just great. Whereas Crepe Myrtles, they look sinewy, they look muscular. There's shape to them, and it's you really get to appreciate it when they don't have their leaves, and they're tough. So that's a good combination. You know, gorgeous and tough. You know, that's a good one. But today we'll be talking about. Let me see. I have set alarms here, but just vibrators, so they tell me move along. But sometimes I don't. Oh good, here's my notes. Yeah, oh man, I'm okay now, I got my notes. Well, I think that's the right one, but we'll talk about bunch of different kinds of trees. We have shade trees, which, as I often say in North Texas, shade is not an option. If you don't have it, you tend to stay inside at some points of the year. So it is a vital ingredient to the yard. We have a bunch of great shade trees, and they have a bunch of functions for us. They're gorgeous, number one, but the shade keeps things cool. And back to the deciduous part of it, in the winter, when the days are shorter and it's cooler, they may have shaded your house and your yard to keep you cool in the heat, but when the winter shows up, they dump their leaves and they let the light in and they let the heat in. So I didn't appreciate that as much, but I've been at my place for over 40 years now, and I have some red oaks that shade the house that make my house bearable. Since it's built in '53, how well insulated would you guess it is? We won't take any guesses. So that has a tremendous benefit to my utilities. If I didn't have those red oaks, it'd be ugly. So they have that feature, but also, you know, going out in the yard, it's great. And they grow fast, and they're adapted here, and so our soil, which is typically, I shouldn't even call it soil. And I don't know, I should even call it dirt. It's that stuff.
Clay.
And I've had experience. I planted a red oak tree at my daughter's house years ago. And she lived in this subdivision up here east of Alliance. The soil wasn't soil, it wasn't dirt. Trash, I think, would be a pretty good term. I saw her house being built, so I got a good look at the soil, and it was, I've seen bad. This was, you know, 1 to 10, 10 being really bad. This was an 11. And I put a red oak in it, 30 gallon, and from the get-go, it just grew like gangbusters. And she lived there for 5 years after I planted it, and it just took off. So, if you're worried about soil, if you're planting trees like that are adapted here, or native here and adapted to what we would call dirt or soil, they don't need what you have in your mind as, you know, gorgeous, you know, fertile soil. They've been here a lot longer than us, and the soil's been here a lot longer than them, and they like it. So don't tell them any different. And they perform, and they grow fast. And of course, we're all familiar with, and I'm on shaky ground here because I say this sometimes and I get a blank look from people, you know, and I think, well, evidently we don't all. But, you know, you've heard the expression, mighty oaks from acorns grow. I got some nods. That's good. Sometimes I say things that I think everybody knows, and I get. So anyway, that's good because I've been at my house a little over 40 years, and I've got 3 big red oaks, and none of them were there when I moved there. The oldest one showed up, I noticed, in the year after I was there. They're all planted by squirrels. They did a good job. That oldest one is now about, the red oak, about 60 feet tall and over 50 feet wide. And sometimes when my wife walks by underneath it and looks up, she just says, so, you know, it can be done here. And of course, on the shade trees, we could go through a real quick list of kind of some of the adapted and the best performers. Of course, a lot of them are oaks. And a question I get a lot of times is, well, now, will it have acorns? Well, it's kind of like, that's the nature of an oak. If it had bananas, it wouldn't be an oak. That would be a different tree. So, not to be disrespectful, but yeah, oak, acorn. And if you want a tree that doesn't drop anything, well, I'm not going to be able to help. But anyway, red oak, live oak, bur oak, chinkapin, those are some of the top oaks around here. They're native, they perform, they get big, relatively pest-free, and of course, while we're on that subject, most pests of trees, the greatest majority of them are what is referred to as aesthetic. What does that mean? That means it might ugly up a few leaves, but it's not really a threat to the tree. So it's kind of like, you know, you could get a pimple, but you're not going to go to the emergency room about it because it's not really a threat. That's the way most of the pests are for trees. Ugly up some leaves. A lot of them, no treatment required. And of course, part of that is that there's good news and bad news. The leaves that are messed up, they're messed up. They won't heal themselves. The good news is they'll be replaced. It puts on new growth, and that's what sustains the tree. You know, since the trees have been here forever, they're going to take some losses. But like I say, not threatening. They just move on and keep growing. So, not to worry. Some other adapted trees are Chinese pistache. It's not native here, but it's adapted. And adapted is the most important word because sometimes I get questions about, well, is this native? Well, we're in Texas. And if you overlay a map of Texas over the map of Europe that's the same scale, how many countries are in there? A lot. So we're from Beaumont to Amarillo, El Paso, Tyler, Corpus Christi, Brownsville. So what would you say that native means? There are plenty of native plants, native in Texas, that wouldn't stand a chance here because they're native in Corpus Christi. We get too cold. So that adaptive, that's the word. Chinese pistache is adaptive. Basically pest-free, strong wood, fast growth, and one of its most outstanding features, well, it's got two. It's a charter member of the ugly duckling club. Because when they're in a 30-gallon or even a 45-gallon, they've kind of got quirky shaped branches. So you could not walk up to it and immediately think, ooh, you're the tree for me. You'd think, wow, this one, maybe it's got a problem, a genetic problem. But no, that's the way they are. They look odd. But like the ugly duckling, we all know what happened here. Pretty quickly, a gorgeous swan, or a Chinese pistache, pretty quickly, a gorgeous shaped tree. And its other outstanding feature is it's probably the most dependable fall color tree that we have. And the reason for that is it doesn't really require fall. If you plant one in San Diego, and you could, and it would do well, it's going to have fall color. San Diego's not known for its fall color. I don't think anybody goes there for that. But Chinese pistache will do it. Now, I'm not exactly sure what color it will be because there's some variety there, but it will be a bright, pretty color. Most commonly orange-red, but it could be red, it could be orange, it could be bright yellow, but it's not going to be brown. You know, it's going to be pretty. So, and of course, here now there's different ideas about. Somebody comes in and says, well, I want a fast-growing tree. Well, I've heard it different ways, and some of the books and I have some disagreement. I've got my red oaks in my yard, and years ago, about 1982, I planted a bur oak that was what I'd refer to as a mop handle. It was about 5 or 6 feet tall and a little bigger around than my thumb, and I'm not sure if it even had any branches or any starts of branches, but now it's a pretty good sized tree. Now the red oaks in my yard grew significantly faster. Some of the books will say bur oak will be the fastest. But by the way, this is a red oak that was planted like a year or year and a half ago. And I can tell you that by looking at the surface of this ground, you might suspect that this soil is not even soil and it's not dirt. Well, you're right. It's more rock than dirt. And he came out all the way to the tips. He's a happy camper in a pretty adverse situation. And the reason I was pointing over that way is, see those trees back behind the barn to the left? Those are bur oaks. They're one of their outstanding features. Well, they have a couple. They've got a really deep fissured bark, kind of corky bark, which it's another thing that when it loses its leaves, it's appealing. You know, it's not to overuse the word gnarly, but that's what it is. It's really deep and coarse. Also, it's probably got the biggest acorns. They're about the size of golf balls. It'll sustain a squirrel for the day. He gets one of those, he's set for the day. But, and gets to be a really big tree. Of course, another one of the trees that's, well, see, it's native east of here or southeast of here, but it'll still work here, and that's ball cypress. And it has quite a different look. And right now, I've been here 8 years, and we have the best inventory of ball cypress that we've ever had. Very big, tall, gorgeous shapes, and I've got one of those in my backyard. How do you think this is? Well, I could be called a tree hugger then. Okay, I've got a big yard, and some trees I've sawed out and planted, and that's one of them. And it's got you know, the ferny little leaves, and it's deciduous, of course, hence the name bald. It goes bald in the winter. It's got a gorgeous structure and a very tough tree. Gets very tall, and fall color is kind of nice. It can be kind of a brick red, but it can have a little orange in there. And it can kind of change over the span of time of fall. Not necessarily hits one color and stays that until it drops. Can change quite a bit, but very pretty. They're kind of tapered in youth. As they get old, you know, they'll broaden out. They can be huge trees. If you've ever been to the River Walk in San Antonio, do you remember seeing any of them? They're there. They're huge. One of them has a plaque on it that says that Sam Houston's snipers climbed that tree to shoot at Santa Anna's troops. So it's been there a while, and it'll be there a while longer. But a big, gorgeous tree, very strong wood, and quite an addition to the landscape. There's not really another tree in the landscape that, you know, what could fill in for that. You know, they're kind of unique in their appearance. Years ago I went to, and I can't even remember, it was some trade show, and they had some PhDs in horticulture there, and they had a Chinese doctorate in horticulture there, and he brought film slides, and the fall cypress in China is, I don't know what the word is, revered? I don't think, sacred might be too strong, but it's revered, you know, And he said he was in a college or place where, you know, he had 4 or 5 other PhDs in ball cypress. And they showed production, and they had these trays of hundreds of little ball cypress, and showed boulevards they have in some of the big cities. Ball cypress, it's quite the tree there. So if you're thinking, what's such a big deal about that? Well, I'm not the only person that thinks they're pretty doggone cool, you know. They are really neat. Live a long time, and just keep getting better and better. The one I planted in my yard was like a 30-gallon, planted it in about 88, and now it's 50 feet tall. And it's one of those trees that I said, you know, when we got some rain and everything leaked out, I looked at it yesterday, and it was another one of those wow moments. It was coming out, and then in a day or two, all of a sudden, boom, it's flush. And then when you see it like that, I thought to myself, now I remember why I planted this tree. This is just too cool. That kind of covers it. And by the way, if you have any questions, I take interruptions. Yes.
Should you really cut down cypress? I mean,
Pardon?
cypress, not cypress trees, crepe myrtles. I hear so many different things about crepe myrtles. Should you? So many people cut them down.
Well, see, in the trade, the pruning that you see around in the trade, that's called Crepe Myrtle.
Yeah.
Because it's not needed. But if you're doing a lawn service, about the time you're doing that, what else is there to do? Not that much. But if you say, you need those Crepe Myrtles trimmed, and I'm the guy, all of a sudden, you've got a paying gig, you know? So, Crepe Myrtle doesn't need much pruning, and one of the kind of definitions or approaches is you shouldn't have to prune anything bigger than a pencil. And that's just kind of cleaning it up. But the other pruning besides that is, and this kind of
What she's doing.
We can't sneak up on anybody. But it's similar to just regular trees in that you don't typically want to just cut back, because cut back, that's not pruning or trimming. That's
Murder.
Pruning.
Clumsy or just wrong, could be a word used, but and it can kill things. I had an example
do that
of
to
that.
the regular trees, and then they say, look at all these branches, and you see these thousands of spindles sticking out, and it's so
that's
ugly.
what it does. But basically, and I have a bunch of big Crepe Myrtles on my house, built in '53. I think they're Tuscarora. Crepe Myrtles have been around a long time, and people have been enthused forever. Rightfully so. They're another one. They're not native here. They're adapted. They do the heat, they do the cold. Once they're established, they're drought tolerant. They have a very long bloom season, and they cope with conditions, you know, good or bad. They're survivors. Trimming those, if it's something bigger than a pencil, then typically you're not dealing with cutting back, you're dealing with removing. And it could be much bigger than a pencil, you know. It could be my thumb, it could be my wrist. But what I'm talking about is that we'll use this guy. you don't just, cutting back is kind of like, well, you know, with no regard for what you're dealing with. Well, if we had, if you had a limb, say on a Crepe Myrtle, you know, but it was bigger than this, and he's dead, so he's not. It's like this, and it's growing through the center. It's like, well, what's his future? You know, you don't want a bunch of stuff growing through the center. So what you would do is, you don't cut him back. You come back to there, you eliminate him. He's out, because if here's my buzzer. You know, I forgot. I got to turn it off. There we are. You know, if it's a limb that doesn't have a future and it's not going to be a future contributor, you take them out. You don't cut them back, you eliminate him. And that puts that energy into the ones that are going to develop a neat shape and that you want to keep. They've kind of earned their spot. But, and when you do that, you know, you might in the future have another little leaf kind of spring up there. And there's a term from, you know, a gangster movies of the 40s and 50s. What do? You rub them out. When it's little and green, you can rub it off with your thumb, and it's not going to keep happening. You just rub them off, and that takes care of it. It puts its energy into the limbs that you want to keep.
Interesting. Max, could you give me an example of 30 gallons? You've mentioned that a few times, but I can't picture, like, that's
a 30 gallon.
So that was 30 gallon a year ago, you said that?
No, not that.
Oh, okay,
No.
okay.
He was a big guy.
Okay.
That's 100 gallons.
All right.
Yeah. That's a 15.
Is the oak's the choice of tree for Texas area? Because they're the most adaptive, perhaps. But where I come from, throughout the United States, I like non-deciduous trees and deciduous trees. I like the split-leaf maple. I like the weeping elm. Do you have these species here?
Well, we do. And we do sell some different varieties of maple and elm. Of course, cedar elm is another good tree. It's not as fast, but it's a native tree, and it is adapted to caliche, harsh soil. You know, if you're driving out in the country and you see some limestone outcropping, and you know, it kind of looks, the foliage of the things out there is, you know, kind of sparse. If you see a native tree growing there, probably a cedar elm. Very adapted, very tough. Doesn't grow as fast as some of the others, but it's a recommended tree. We do sell some maples, and they will do okay here. They would prefer a little more water than we typically get. That's one of the things about the red oak. It's adapted to less than average water, but also it's adapted to our weather. We are hot much longer and typically hotter than, you know, a lot of the maple areas. When you're in a place where maple is the dominant tree out there, it's not as hot as here. Now, contrary to what some customers have told me, oh, I'm from so-and-so, and it gets just as hot there. Well, it does, but the difference being here, for a very long time. And living things, you know, there's such a thing as, well, you know, a cheetah can run really fast. You can't run for very long. either makes the catch pretty quick or he's done. And then he's got to sit down or lay down and cool off, because if he kept running, it'd kill him. He can't do it over a long period of time because he would overheat. That's what we have here. The USDA hardiness zone map, which has probably been around 100 years, it deals with the average low temperature in the winter. Here we're zone 8, and that means 10 to 20 degrees. But much later than that, the American Horticultural Society came out with not a cold hardiness map. Theirs is a heat zone map. And it's calculated on, and I may get the detail of it right or wrong, but 86 degrees figures in there. The number of days that are either above 86 or 86 or hotter. And here, that's 150 days or more. And my point about the cheetah is animals are adapted to that they can survive that, because pretty much a truism about plants, and roses is a great example. If it never got above 85 degrees, roses would just be in heaven. But most plants, physiologically, when it goes 86 degrees or hotter, it's a game changer. You know, physiologically, that's a next step apart. So they've got to be adapted to that. And so our native trees, they've been here forever. So when we have 30 or 40 or 50 days, or 60 or 67, I think we've had 100 or above, they're like, well, yeah, that's what we do. They're adapted to that. They won't necessarily like it, but they'll survive it. You know, years ago when we had 20 or 30 years ago, we had a pretty bad drought, and I drove I-30 east of downtown, and there's a little hilly section there with native trees and all, and maybe 20% of them still had leaves, and then 20% of them had leaves that were brown, and then the others didn't have any leaves. And I thought, make a mental note, when this is over, you know, next year or whenever, drive over here and notice how many of them croaked. Because you knew for sure when you drove by there that summer that they were all under serious stress. Well, the next year, the drought was over. We had a bunch of rain. I drove through in the season and looked out there. I couldn't see one dead tree. Not one. Yes?
When you have newer planted trees and then we have this hot summer, how often should you water them? You know, 3 times a week?
That question. Because this is something that we need to appreciate. People are people. Trees are trees. And when it gets hot, what do we say about us? I could use some iced tea. Or some ice cold water. Well, we're doing that for as much as anything. If we drink an ice cold drink, it helps to cool us down. Even if we aren't thirsty, it helps to cool us down. But, you know, also, we've been sweating and we hydrate ourselves. Whereas trees, and of course when we take that cold drink, we may go inside to the air conditioner. Distinct from trees, they don't get to go inside into the air conditioning, and they don't get to have ice with their liquid. They're out there in the sun and they're there all day. And 100 degrees, they're in it all day. So a lot of people think of when it gets hot, I need to water the tree. Trees are best watered when they're thirsty because they're not overheating. Now, they may be stressed from thirst, but the heat's not going to bother them. Like I say, they've been here forever. That's what they do. So don't water trees in reaction to it's 105 degrees. I better get out there and water. That's a day at the beach for trees. They do it all the time. They do it for months at a time. But if it were 80 degrees and they're thirsty, now that's something else. You know, they want to drink pretty quick. You know,
she's talking about a new young tree that you just planted.
But I mean, that's the thing. You know, young tree, old tree, don't water in reaction to heat. Now, heat will contribute to them eventually needing water. Don't get me wrong. And of course, low humidity.
So how often should you water them though? How do I know it's hard for me to tell because there's a tendency to react to the heat.
Well,
3 times a week or?
We have a care sheet. Fancy that, a tree farm that has a printout on how you might water your trees. And of course, we go down the left side, you know, the size of the tree. You know, 15 gallon, that's a 7 gallon. We don't have that on here. You know, these are 15 gallons. We start out with a 15 gallon, do 30, 45, hundreds on here. And it's got 5 different time periods for the year. And how much you put typically doesn't change. The thing that changes is how often you do it, which is kind of your question. But here, the amount that you water is also important because our soils are heavy clay, and you know the old adage of, you know, if more is good, way more is better, and too much is just right. That kills trees. When you water a tree, we want to give it enough to where it gets a good drink and sustains it, and then that's it. You don't want to put excess in there because excess won't percolate away. It'll collect in the bottom of the hole and start rotting roots. So that's the reason why on the care sheet you're given an amount to water and a frequency, and the frequency is adjusted. Of course, if it's like a 30 gallon, if it was in January, you're going to put 15 gallons on it once a week. If it's the most demanding time, June through September, you know, especially July, August, but June through September, you know, that's going to be 15 gallons twice a week. And of course, that's not an absolute. You still factor in what's the weather doing, and if we have a rainstorm and it rains an inch, that's probably taking care of a watering episode. But if it rains a quarter of an inch, that didn't really do anything. So, and of course, so your of course, things in general, keep an eye on them. You know, look at them morning and evening. If you do see some wilt or whatever, hopefully the tree doesn't get to that point. But if you do, you know, give it the prescribed water, and within an hour or two, you know, it should perk back up. But big rain, that's not usually. How often do we have big rain? Not often. More frequently, we have low humidity and high winds. So when the humidity level is 15 or 18%, the wind's blowing 30 miles an hour all day, and
and all night. And I don't remember that it used to blow all night. But maybe I just don't remember. But nowadays, man, it can blow all day, and then it blows all night. And usually it seemed like when the sun went down, it kind of eased up a bit. Well, when that's happening, those are what I call hair dryer days. So it's kind of, be paying attention, because, you know, that's the more frequent stress thing that we have for trees is, you know, the hair dryer days. And we have these if anybody, you know, needs them. Of course, when you buy a tree, you get one. But
I have another question.
Okay.
I have a Bradford pear tree out front that's my front of my yard. It's really big, and it's got these roots on top of the ground, and it's always shooting up these little sprouts. What's the best way to stop that?
well, you can on shallow roots. You can prune those out. You know, you can prune roots similar to the way you would prune a limb. And typically, I did some years ago on a tree I had in my yard. It only had like 2 or 3 that were kind of shallow and were kind of in the way. So they were on the surface for like 7 or 8 feet. And I just kind of dug down at this end, and I got my little razor saw out. And the thing is about pruning roots, it's the same thing as pruning limbs. You know, you don't break it on a limb and twist it off. You make a clean cut.
Okay.
It's the same thing on roots. You know, you make a clean cut, pick up that root, you make a clean cut out here, and that typically, you know, takes care of it.
So what is the absolute best, okay, let me rephrase it. Is it okay to plant a tree July, August, you know, because I need a couple of trees,
Yeah.
more trees.
We plant them every year, or every month of the year. And
I mean, I know there's more ideal, but ideal doesn't work for me sometimes.
You know, the ideal is, you know, there's some factors that go in there, but typically all of our trees are container grown.
so,
You know, they're not stressed.
and if they're planted right,
You know, they're just as soon be in the ground.
above the ground in a black pot, you know, through the summer, it's a more welcoming environment. You can certainly do that. The thing that changes is your margin of error changes. You know, obviously, if you plant it in January, the tree is dormant. Even if it's an evergreen tree, it's dormant. So there's not the environment's benign. You know, it's not stressful to it. It's kind of hibernated. But if it's in July, you know, metabolism is going, and it's a stressful time, you know, July, August, September. So the margin for error is smaller. When it needs a drink in January, if it's a week late getting it, if it needs a drink in July and it's a week late getting it, it's a problem, you know. So that's the thing that changes. And of course, the thing that kind of determines the ideal is that being where we are, our soil doesn't, not only it doesn't freeze, it doesn't even get cold. I've done thermometer up here in the soils, in the turf, in our flower beds, end of January, beginning of February. I think the coldest I've ever seen was 52. That's not cold.
Roots will function 40 degrees up.
Roots will be growing and making progress. So here, and this is obvious too when you plant perennials in the fall. You plant a
Cork perennial in the fall, and when it comes out in March or April, it's not a cork. It's turned into a monster because the soil was relatively warm. It wasn't doing any top growth, but the roots were going wild. Well, the same thing is true with trees. In 50 to 60 degree soil temperatures,
if you plant a tree in November or December, the top's not going to change much, but the roots are going to be going gangbusters. And the further ahead, so you got a root head start. So the further ahead of July that the roots are getting established, you know, the better. The tree's got a head start. But you can still plant in July. You just have to, when it needs a drink, you give it a drink, and it's actively growing. And of course, one of the things that helps is that as far as reading plants is concerned, the new growth, that's the canary in the coal mine. Everybody's heard that one too, haven't they? About the canary in the coal mine. Okay, good. Well, boy, we got a smart group here today. Man. Well, anyway, yeah, if the canary dies, it's like, uh-oh, might be time to leave the mine. Well, if the new growth, which, see, you have some plants that, like Magnolia, they've got a really stiff leaf. That leaf is never going to wilt. It tells you when it's too dry, it falls off. That's a little late to be getting the message. But on that same tree, if he's got new growth, way before anything thinks about falling off, that new growth will do that. And then you give it a drink, and an hour or two later, it's back up, and it's like, end of the mystery. You know, at that point, you give yourself a quiz. When was the last time I watered? How much did I water? And what was the weather like in the interim? Then you start to get the feel of how long it can go, how often I should water, you know, just by reading the plants. Okay. Covered shade trees and a bunch of the physiology. I brought some other stuff up here, some ornamental trees. Why? Because I felt like it and nobody stopped me. And some of it might even not be considered a tree. Well, too bad. This is smoke tree, kind of a large ornamental shrub. But how about that cool foliage? Man, oh man. And these guys will get 15 feet or more, and they're deciduous. Is everybody with me on that? I see sometimes when I say that, I get a blank look. Loses its leaves in the winter. But it's just absolutely gorgeous. And of course the next question is, well, what does that have to do with smoke? It blooms. The bloom looks like smoke. They're itty bitty blooms, and there's hundreds of them. And it just looks like puffs of smoke on it. As far as I'm concerned, it's the least desirable feature. But it still has gorgeous foliage, so I can look past the blooms that are, they're kind of a novelty, but the foliage is so gorgeous that, you know, hey. And of course you may have it in your yard, it may bring a bunch of when it blooms, you may get a lot of questions. What is that? What happened to it? But anyway, just, and of course, since it's deciduous, extremely cold hardy. We're never going to have a winter that's going to, the colder our winter gets, happier it's going to be. But the neat thing of it is that I'm a sucker for several things, and contrasts in colors is one of them.
It bloom all summer.
And when you have that, man, you've got an opportunity for, do you have an opportunity for contrast? In fact, I got a, you know, I'm a half-price books sucker, you know. So I got one over there. I found it, and it's a little jewel. It's a pearl. It's a designer gardens plantings with 6 plants or less. And one of the first ones in there, they know how to. The guy that did the book, he knows how to grab you. The first one in there had one of these, and I had a plant, I can't even tell you the name of it, but it was chartreuse, finely cut leaves. And for those who are in question, thank green potato vine. You know, that light green with this. And then the other thing that they had was the nickname for it, and we have them in now in stock, the Beena on a stick. The Beena barneriensis. And that is a perennial and very vertical stems, small leaves, and kind of purplish blooms, little balls. So it's like blooms on little sticks, just gorgeous. And talk about, you know, a contrast to this. It was just, you knew why it was one of the first things that they had in the book. And when I saw that, I thought, I'm buying this book.
Does that smoke tree like shade or sun or
Sun.
sun? Full sun?
Full sun. And this is where my assistant will be helping.
Most kind It's like tulip.
This is a deciduous magnolia. And see those neat leaves? I just love them. It's deciduous. It'll take a lot more cold than you will ever get. There's the bloom. Commonly, from when I was a kid, I heard this called a tulip tree. Not a tulip, it's a magnolia, but that resembles a tulip. So, of course, like a redbud, it puts on its bloom before it puts on its foliage. So, it's a drama queen. You know, there's no two ways around it. But the other thing about it is, I love those big green leaves, and it's, see, I kind of coined the term that the stash is a, try to remember the ugly ducklings love. Well, my coin for this one is, if you want a split personality tree, this is it. Because, see, like redbud, no foliage, blooms. This one, no foliage, blooms. So it's kind of the quintessential cold weather, deciduous, blooming thing, you know? But when that's behind it, and it starts putting on this foliage, this thing and a bunch of the others of the deciduous magnolias, some are even more dramatic than this. Got these big green leaves, kind of soft green leaves. And if you have a planting that has banana trees, and elephant ears, and cannas, and tropical hibiscus that looks tropical as Hawaii, this fits right in. It's got the big, neat colored, soft green leaves, and you look at it and you think, I wonder what kind of tropical tree that is. Well, it's not, but hence the split personality. It kind of functions in the different seasons of the year.
Nicknames, tulip tree.
Definitely assistant time right there. And of course, here's the magnolia, more like what we're familiar with. Little gem magnolia. Big bold leaves, evergreen. And of course, as opposed to the older from years ago, which I haven't seen in forever, the regular Magnolia Grandiflora, the back of the leaves were green, lighter green than the top. So appearance-wise, okay. But once you see ones that kind of have a cinnamon color back to them, it's like a designer got a hold of a Magnolia Grandiflora and made it look really good. You know, that's what that does to me. And neat color, of course, evergreen, slow. And it's kind of called a dwarf, although basically what it is slow. It can get over 20 feet, maybe even 25. I'm not going to be here. But it's an ornament, and one of the top 5, you know, as far as, you know, ornament in the landscape. That, to me, it's kind of like, it really classes up a landscape. And I also love things that it's a little bit of designer in it. There's only a little bit, but it's neat when plants give a sense of place. And you know, when you see a magnolia like this, you're not in Nebraska. You know you're in the South. And that's part of what the charm of this tree is. Also, gorgeous blooms. And here's another bud. There's a bud, there's a bud. There's another bud. There's one that's finished. But the standout about Little Jim is they can cope with our soil, and usually by the end of May, they're in bloom. And they're going to bloom June, July, August, September, October. It's not unusual for me to see these things still in bloom in November. So it's like, I'm persuaded, you know, they are above average. Whereas I would, my other term is they're an overachiever. We can just face it, they're an overachiever.
Is that what you call a southern magnolia?
Well, it came from that. Southern magnolia is Magnolia Grandiflora. And I could tell you about the last time I saw one, if I could remember it, and I can't. The big leaf one we have right over there is D.D. Blanchard. And then we have another one here that's between Little Jim and D.D. Blanchard. It's also a smaller growing one called Teddy Bear. I haven't seen a regular Magnolia Grandiflora in forever. If you're going to see one of those, it's probably been there a very long time. The one that stands out in my mind is I was going to Lake Texoma years ago, driving through Denison, and they had one that, man, to the ground and up, and it was at least 60 feet tall, and it had been there a while. It was a landmark.
Is there one better than the others for screening purposes if you wanted to plant several?
Well, the key about screening is, and that's the reason I emphasized slow. If I was going to do a screening, I'd probably be doing some kind of a big holly. But, you know, these would fulfill the screening part, but you're going to have to plant a lot of them, because even the ones we have in 45 gallon, you know, they may be 5 feet wide. Although another attribute of Little Jim is they are very shapeable. We have some back there, and I think they're in 15 gallons in size, and they're on a trellis that's 6 feet by 6 feet. So you can do that with a Little Jim. Put them on a trellis and have them go, you know, they're not going to be deep, they're going to be wide and go up. So that's something that you can do with them. But, you know, I always mention that they're slow because I don't want somebody to say, you know, this thing's been in there for 2 or 3 years and I can still see the neighbors. You know. Uh-oh. That one is, I didn't need my assistance in that one because it's in a light soil, so it doesn't rain much.
That's on video.
This job is not without its dangers.
At least you got shade.
needs a drink. That's another reason why he's so light. But there's another little ornamental. And of course, before I get too far past it, since we're talking about ornamentals, I didn't bring one up, but around here, one of the best, of course, and we talked about Crepe Myrtles. You've got a choice of colors and sizes, and a lot of them are, the bigger ones there, 15 to 30 feet. They've got a pretty good growth rate. Got a bunch of neat colors, gorgeous trees. And of course we have some, we can't see the video, but if you look that direction, see those tall things that are planted in the ground? Those are Natchez Treatments. And they will go 25 or 30 feet. They're bloom white, fast growth, and their bark kind of from the same club as the back of the leaf on the Magnolia is a cinnamon colored. Just really ornamental. And now back to our lightweight. This is a Vitex, which are popular here. Deciduous, extremely heat tolerant, grows pretty fast, can be 15 tall and wide, bigger with age. This one is a variety, new one. I think maybe we got the first time last year. We have more of them this year, and it's called Flipside because, and some of them it's more noticeable than others. I'm hoping to win this fight right here. But the back side of it is a lavender color, which is ornate. And they are typically, most of the Vitex we get in, they're kind of more of a bush form, but since they grow fast, you can do them the same way you would a Crepe Myrtle. Trim off the lower limbs and keep as many upright as you want, and then just clean it as you go and shape it as you'd like to. But they seems to be a little bit different from the other Vitex, but the other Vitex, just the regular, has like 5 leaflets on the leaf, which to me resembles a little bit a Japanese maple. So I just call them the Texas Japanese maple because the difference is the Vitex, they want to be here. You know, they like the heat and the harshness. They grow like gangbusters in it, and like I say, you can shape them. And of course, I don't want to leave it out. They bloom. You know, the blue blooms through the summer, so very attractive. And there aren't that many big things that bloom blue. So, a neat addition to the landscape. That's the nursery approach to a high wind day. When it goes down, leave it down. Unless you're going to do something that changes the situation, standing it up, just to let it go down again, it just gets more beautiful. This one's got different soil.
You need help, Max?
No. I'm feeling bad. Okay, I'm back. And see, this one's here because I'm giving the talk and nobody said I couldn't. It's really more of a shrub, but can be done like a Crepe Myrtle. This is a pineapple guava. And well, I guess 2 or 3 years ago, the last time I went to Dallas Arboretum, they're using a bunch of these in big pots with other stuff planted around them. Some of them were 2 or 3 times this big. But of course, its charm is it loves the heat and sun. Flowers are pretty. and they're edible, and it makes the fruit. And one of the reasons why they had them in the containers was, I love the foliage. It's kind of a grayish green. It's tough. And one of the neat things about it, you know, with being a grayish green, is the trunks are kind of a orangish color. So you strip those leaves off, you let it grow up like a Crepe Myrtle. It's another overachiever.
How tall does it get?
And those guys, now it can get, it's not that fast, but it can get over 10 feet.
What color are their blooms?
The blooms they've got kind of some pink and red. And we probably have, I think I have some 3 gallons up there, and they have a picture there we can look at. But a neat plant, and the time that I mentioned that I was at the Arboretum and saw them in all the big pots with other stuff around them, as we were leaving, I noticed they had some planted near the entrance. We were going past on the way out, and this was like December 10th or 15th, and those had fruited, and most of the fruit had already fallen to the ground. I'm not above eating fruit off the ground, you know? So we gathered up some fruit, and it got kind of a thick rind, almost kind of like citrus, but you break it open, and it's kind of a little soft round pulp. We ate several. Very tasty. Very tasty.
How often does it need to be watered?
That's one of those. Depends if you have it in the ground or in a pot. But like I say, go by the new growth.
Okay.
Typically, you know, shrub things, smaller things here. The time we're getting into, you're probably talking a couple times a week. But keep an eye out, because you know, if we have a hairdryer day, it may like, I need help, you know. And of course, on smaller things, like 3 gallons or 7 gallons, you know, for a 3-gallon thing, you're talking a gallon or 2, and he's happy. You know, if it's a 10-gallon or 15-gallon, you know, you're talking 6-10 gallons, somewhere in there.
And what size is that one?
Pardon?
What size is that one?
It's like a 10.
Okay.
You know, this one's a 7, but this one that this is in is about the same diameter, but it's a lot deeper, so it'll be like a 10-gallon.
Okay.
How does a pineapple guava handle shade?
Not well. And of course, here's the thing. Here we are in North Texas. Everybody nods. Yeah, okay. Good. Anyway, my point being is that shade here is North Texas shade. So, if you're talking under trees,
Right.
that can still be a lot of light. See, under trees, the sunlight is not blocked, it's filtered. So that can still be pretty bright. And when things say, when you read tags on plants and it says full shade to part shade, or full sun to part sun, I'm sorry. If like mid-morning to mid-afternoon or whatever in there, if you get 6 hours of sun in that time frame, that's full sun. You know, if it's very early, you know, from sun up to whatever, you know, that first couple hours, you know, might be. But if you're talking, you know, it's 8 o'clock to 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the summer, anytime in there, you get 6 hours. That's full sun. Now, when you're talking vegetable and real fruit trees, they're going to want 8. You know, they'll do with 6, but the things that are really, you're after real production, they would still prefer 8 or more. They could take it all day, but and of course the thing is too, is that, and I see driving through neighborhoods all the time, I see plants in shade that look really good that are plants that can take a lot more sun, and they're blooming and looking good, and I think, now I wouldn't necessarily have guessed that. But then again, it goes back to, it's a pretty long day, and that sun is pretty intense, and it's only filtered. So, my point being, it could take some shade, and the caveat is, as long as somebody's, time's up, here we are, last word, as long as somebody's not interested in like ultimate production, then I would say, you know, go for it. Okay, that'll do it for today. Thanks for the people that tuned in, and you guys here, and we'll have questions, whatever.
Thank you, Max.